investment perspective, so we've invested quite a bit in open source models. JBoss and ZenSource are two recent ones, and a slew of others. And I think open source is not a model for every business, so don't everyone go start off open source businesses. But I think there are certain dynamics about open source that are really effective. One is in terms of building a community of developers early on to kind of get this thing going and evangelized. In this case, Bram had his kind of community built around him to go ahead and add to the product. But over time, that's actually not where most of the value is, because you end up building most of the technology yourself. Frankly, the open source community never really contributes nearly as much as the actual developer of the originator of the open source. So the real value in open source we've seen is distribution. You get free distribution, right? Whether it's Linux, you don't need a sales guide. People just download Linux, right? JBoss, you don't need a sales guide. People just download JBoss App Server. So it's the ability to have distribution without a sales force. And the sales force is what costs a lot of money, right? So what BitTorrent was able to do is get massive distribution, 150 million peers. And to my earlier comment, you're not a peer-to-peer network unless you have a lot of peers. So for us, the open source actually was a really efficient way of getting the distribution problem solved. How are you going to convince everyone to download their clients unless you do kind of an open source type model? And that's kind of what we thought was particularly powerful. From a monetization perspective, like all the other great open source companies, you have to do something other than the core protocol in this case in order to monetize. And as Ashwin mentioned, there's a lot of proprietary extensions that we built on top that you have to basically participate and pay for in order to get that value. But the good news is once you've already have this stuff out there, then it's a lot easier to go back to the person and say, hey, do you want to pay a little bit extra more to get this additional value, right? So now you have 150 million peers. It's easier to go to a gaming company and say, hey, by the way, do you want to reduce your bandwidth cost by X? Because we got all these peers out there that is already out there. And so they can get immediate value without you having to go sell and do all that kind of work. So, it's not, the model doesn't fit for everything, but in this particular case, we saw open source as a very smart and actually distinctive way of getting distribution. And the proprietary stuff is all the other technology that's been built on top.